If I had to choose just one author to recommend to you who want to improve your English through reading, there's a good chance I would choose George Bernard Shaw. And the reason is that George Bernard Shaw wrote dozens of plays and literary criticism and essays, and also combinations of these, because he used to write very long epilogues and prologues to his plays that basically form as theses, almost scientific theses, before and after the fictional play. And he covered almost every topic in the social sciences and the humanities, not always in the most thorough way, but always in a very witty way and in a very distinctive style. Which means that you can do it just like I did. I read dozens of his plays. Many of them were at home because my mother studied comparative literature, so I had access to a lot of his printed plays. But a couple of years ago, I just went to Amazon and I bought for something like $1 a copy of all his plays in one very long file. All of them appear in Project Gutenberg, and some people would invest a few cents to try to collect them nicely, and then you can just get them on your iPad and read them. And that's what I did. I have all these plays, and I read some of them through the iPad as well. So that's a great way to read potentially tens of thousands of pages of an author with the same style, with a very clear style, and that's a great way to learn. You don't have to copy his style. You can just have to refer to it as a point of reference to say, I understand that this is a potential style, now I'm going to develop my own and develop my own voice. My name is Shai Dotan. I am Associate Professor of International Public Law at the University of Copenhagen Faculty of Law, and the purpose of this series of lectures is to help you improve your English. I want to start with the most successful play of George Bernard Shaw, and the most well-known one, Pygmalion. Pygmalion was an incredibly successful play adapted to a musical, which was adapted to a film, My Fair Lady, a very successful film with Audrey Hepburn that is known throughout the world. There's also a black and white version of the movie Pygmalion, which I enjoyed very much watching. So a very successful play, and it's relevant for my audience because this play is about the importance of language. And the story is the following. There is an expert of languages that has a bet with a friend that he can take a girl from the street that speaks in a very jibe form of English, a Cockney accent, which is an accent only used by the lowest parts of the British society, and he could make her, within a short time, speak like a princess, so completely change her accent, and this will have a completely different effect on other people. And so he does. He teaches how to pronounce the H that is very high in a British proper Oxfordian accent, and manages to make her sound like a member of aristocracy. Now that's a very interesting play because I think it first of all shows the importance of language in social climbing, which I think is still relevant today. But it also puts emphasis on something that we didn't talk about so much in these lectures, and that's the issue of accent, how important accent is. I recall I had a good friend of my family who taught me English, and she was able to meet people on the street for the very first time, and just by listening to them, she would know which street of London they came from. Which street of London they came from. So every street, every neighborhood had a different accent. There were slight differences, but they were very, very important. And they told you a lot about this particular social setting of the individual. I think that this is something that we see changing in front of our eyes today, because today children are exposed not just to television, but also to YouTube, where people talk a lot of different accents, and all the accents blend very, very fast as a result. So they don't have this very distinctive feature where you talk to your friends at school, they all come from the same background, they all speak the same way, and because of that, you have a particular accent that grows on you. Now, I want to say this is something that has, before the age of television and later the age of YouTube and exposure to people with different accents, this is something that is as old as humanity itself, perhaps. In the Bible itself, they say about the tribe of Ephraim that he was not able to pronounce the letter, what we would write sh, sh. He couldn't say sh. They only say s, s. So s instead of sh. And in one of the famous battles in the Bible, the tribe of Ephraim was escaping from a battlefield, and in order to determine if a person that was escaping was a member of the Ephraim tribe or of another tribe, they were supposed to say the word shibolet. Shibolet, which I as an Israeli can say very easily, but if I would be a member of Ephraim, I would say sibolet. And once they said it, they were killed. So that's something that existed almost 3,000 years ago. And if you look not so long ago to the civil war in Lebanon in the 80s, so 40 years ago, people were using exactly the same technique, because people were running between areas, and in order to see which area you would come from, you had to say the word bandora, which is tomato in Arabic, and if you said it in a slightly different way, it showed which social group you come from, and this can be something that would determine your life or death. So this is something that the way we pronounce words was very, very important throughout history, and it's interesting to see how important it is today. If today George Bernard Shaw would write a play like that, Pygmalion, would the audience really understand that a slight difference in the pronunciation of a word would mean so much for social climbing? I actually get these questions a lot from my students who ask me about the importance of accents and how to improve them. And I say, I think they are less important now because we are so used to having people coming from other areas of the world, mixing accents. It's very, very difficult to deliberately change your accent effectively. Every language that you speak a lot, your accent which say slowly, and this will kind of create a whole residue of accents inside your language. So if, for example, you are immigrant to Israel from Russia, and then afterwards you go to the United States, you would have an accent that is partly Russian, partly Israeli, and partly American, and this would go with you. Changing that effectively is very hard. And to my students, I just say you just have to try to immerse yourself socially. So I don't think that today a play like Pygmalion would be written in exactly the same way. There are other things that are very important. So I think, for example, a large vocabulary is important, good control of grammar, and then if you look at presentation, body language, how secure you are in speaking, all these things are still very, very important. Very, very specific differences in accents, less important for social climbing. Now, you may wonder why the name Pygmalion was chosen. Now, Pygmalion is a Greek story about an artist that made a sculpture and then fell in love with it. And George Bernard Shaw is taunting the readers a little bit because he's trying to see if they're going to think that the old professor would fall in love with a very attractive lady, played by Audrey Hepburn. So somebody that is very, very beautiful. And eventually this doesn't happen. And she ends up marrying some postboy that appears as a side character in the story. But the other reason Pygmalion is important, and that's something that I do take with me very much as a teacher, is the famous Pygmalion effect. So the idea that if you trust somebody and you show to them that they are successful, you celebrate the successes, they believe they are smart, they actually work harder and become much better. And that's something that I think applies to everything. And of course, not just to the way you speak and the accent, which, as I said, is a bit less important today, but to anything else that makes you distinctive and successful through the use of language. Even though a lot of readers of Bernard Shaw just know Pygmalion, he has really many dozens of plays that are worth reading. He won the Nobel Prize in the 20s, and since then produced more work until his death at a very old age. So he's a very, very prolific author. And he wrote about a variety of topics. So you have historical plays like St. John, which I really like. It's about Joan of Arc. basically presenting her story with some reflections about Christianity and history and society that are very deep. Again, I always recommend, if you're really interested in George Bernard Shaw, don't just read the play. Try to find a place where you can read the epilogue, the play, and the prologue, so you get all the essays together. He also wrote literary criticism separate from plays. He has a very great essay about the Nibelungen's Ring of Wagner, and on many different topics. But he also has the plays, which are definitely worth reading. And again, Saint John is basically one of my favorite. He has a play about Caesar and Cleopatra, which is very distinctive in the clarity in which he addresses the issues. So you try to think that, when you speak about these historical figures that change history forever, he would do it in a way that is very reverent. And then when he speaks about Julius Caesar and how ashamed he is of being a middle-aged man that is also getting bored, and Cleopatra just being a young girl with interest of a normal teenager girl, this is something that I think is very, very unique, this type of writing, realistic writing, without really falling into all kinds of pompous accidents that you can do when you're dealing with such an historical theme. So histories are definitely a good reason to read George Bernard Shaw, and you will learn a lot of it also, because he was very, very a very educated man. He knew a lot about all the different topics, and if you read through him, you will just get yourself educated in history and all the humanities and all the social sciences at the same time. There are many plays in which he basically practices his cynicism. There's a play that I really like called Arms and the Men, in which he describes a soldier that is basically carrying around a couple of chocolate in a pocket instead of carrying a gun, basically saying there's no reason to take a gun anymore. War is not about heroism, we have machine guns. The proper soldier is a person that just has a clear mind, understanding of math and economics and logic, and they are much more important. And that's just a very cynical, enjoyable play. Another play that is worth mentioning is Major Barbara, which describes a woman that is working, I think, with the Salvation Army, and her father is this magnet of, I think, alcohol and weapons or something like this, exactly the opposite. But eventually you realize that A, money moves the world, and B, if you want to make money, you actually have to have good values. So actually this character that is just a Greek teacher ends up inheriting all the vast fortune of those made by the father in this illicit ways. So this is the kind of plays where George Bernard Shaw is really at his best. He writes very well, he writes clearly, he covers a variety of topics and makes some kind of a social criticism that is just basically made of sharpened cynicism and witticism. A lot of witticism belong to him. As I said in one of the other shows, lectures, most of the witticism in the English language come from Mark Twain, Oscar Wilde, and George Bernard Shaw. So that is a great source of that. Another one of the very famous plays, probably really one of the top 5 famous plays by George Bernard Shaw, is Men and Superman, which basically describes a man that is desiring the Nietzschean ideal of Superman, kind of against all social values, and then very easily being hunted down by a woman who is interested in him. So it's a play about the different sexes and the different tensions that they have. That's also something that is very much worth reading. But you can see what the issues that are relevant in a realistic drama or comedy that is just revolving around the main issues that are relevant to society. And with that, it was very, very good. A lot of plays deal with Christianity. The most thorough introduction to Christianity that I read comes from Androcles and the Lion, before one of his plays, but it appears in many, many different issues. I don't think he was a very, very deep religious scholar, but he definitely thought deeply about the New Testament and about many of its interpreters, and it's definitely worth reading. So if you're interested in religion, in the sources of religion, you will learn a lot from George Bernard Shaw. As you can see, really, the topics are very, very vast, but I want to stress that I don't view him as a thinker that you can rely on if you want to deal with complicated problems. One of the things that was really showing to me how dangerous it was is that he has a lot of plays and essays in which there is basically a socialistic vision. And the interesting thing is that he would say things, and again, I'm now saying it, in my Israeli accent and in a very blunt way, but basically what he would say is, it's wrong to have more wealth than others. We need to have a society that doesn't have rich people. Again, very, very bluntly, we put it very, very wittily, but I say the same thing. So it's it's almost immoral to amass wealth at the expense of others or instead of others, which means that you have to have a communist society. And in addition to that, he realizes that this will mean there will be no incentive for work, and he just says, if people don't work, they need to be put to death, they need to be killed. Now, already in his time, I think there was some evidence of what this means, but today, after the 20th century, we know what kind of horrors these regimes are capable of. And that's why I say George Bernard Shaw is a great writer and a great way to play around with ideas, but I would never trust him if I want to make a plan or a program to improve society or anything else for that matter. I found a book a few years in Copenhagen that was an old version of Conversations with George Bernard Shaw, published more than 100 years ago. And he was going in these conversations, again, probably just speaking as easily as I'm speaking now, but with incredible wit, about any topic under the sun. And the guy asked him about Albert Einstein's theory of relativity, and he starts to say, I think it's wrong. And again, with very, very deep wit, clear, beautiful, lucid sentences, but without any knowledge of physics or math or anything of that sort. So George Bernard Shaw is just a man that can, with a straight face, tear apart a scientific theory without knowing anything about it. And that's just something that makes him unique, also potentially dangerous, if you care for that matter. I have to say that the ability to speak convincingly about any topic with clear, perfectly constructed sentences that combine a lot of knowledge used to be the highest mark of genius. There are other marks as well, but this is probably the highest mark of genius because that's how you can produce, great volumes of beautiful prose that is going to be read by millions, which is he did with his plays. But this is just something that I think today may be less appreciated because ChatGPT can do just the same. So I can ask ChatGPT to speak freely about Christianity or about social criticism or about the theory of relativity, and maybe it will not be as witty as George Bernard Shaw now, but it'll do a perfectly good job. So maybe it's a good thing actually that today we have some replacement of that, and maybe we need to look for other marks of genius besides this ability to speak without any hindrance about any topic, while clearly ChatGPT does what's called hallucination, so basically just inventing things to support the narrative. George Bernard Shaw did quite the same thing, trying to support his narrative through his wit. So definitely something that is worth considering when you speak about genius today. If a conclusion is that this genius of George Bernard Shaw, the ability to speak fluently and knowledgeably about any topic, is not such a great asset, so why do I think that is a great way for you to learn English? Now, as I said at the beginning, I don't want you to copy George Bernard Shaw. I want you to use him as a reference point. Okay, so just like you could try to determine your location by looking at the stars and finding where you are compared to something else, when you find your own voice as a writer, it's very useful to have people that have a very distinctive style. You understand their style, and you kind of develop your own style by reference to them. It was said about Thomas Carlyle that the best literary advice is don't be like him. And yet people read him. They still read today, but they say that no person survived the 19th century without reading his famous book, Sartor Resartus, and many other read others. Carlyle may be a topic for a different talk, but he had a very, very distinctive style that was incredibly enthusiastic and extreme, and this is something that young authors should not do. But if they read him and they say, okay, this is Thomas Carlyle, and how can I refer to him? I will not be as enthusiastic or as substantiated as him. I define myself by contrast to him. This is something that is very useful. So George Bernard Shaw gives you that. He gives you this ability to say, on any topic, because he wrote so much, I'm going to look at such essays, and I'm going to say, maybe I'm not going to be as witty as him. Maybe I need to be much more substantiated than him. Maybe I need to explain myself more clearly. How can I define myself by contrast to him? So that's a very useful thing. Again, I'm not saying that you should always be the opposite of him. He has a lot of great qualities. But I'm saying that in your process of learning, being able to identify a style, circumscribe a voice, will help you to circumscribe your own voice. That's exactly the exercise that I want to do. And with some authors it's difficult because there's just a very limited amount of writings that they have made, or the writing is in a very particular topic. The beautiful thing about George Bernard Shaw is there's always more. There's always another play out of many, many dozens that he wrote, another book about social criticism, literary criticism. There's endless material, and you can learn from it a lot. So I really recommend him as one of the key authors that you should read in order to improve your English.